The first thing I noticed when I got home early was that the door was cracked open, not unlocked. Opened. I froze. My heart started thudding, not out of fear, but fury. No one had permission to be in my house. No one. I live in a quiet, upscale neighborhood where everyone minds their business. Except her. Karen, president of the HOA, self-declared gatekeeper of community standards. She once filed a complaint because I had wind chimes that were too whimsical. Today she crossed the line. I stepped inside cautiously. My law books were scattered on the floor. My gavel was missing from the shelf. Then I heard humming coming from my kitchen. I walked in. There she was, wearing white gloves, inspecting my spice rack. "Oh, Judge Thomas," she said, startled but unashamed. "Didn't expect you home this early. I was just performing a standard HOA inspection." In my locked house, she waved a folder like it was a badge. "You agreed to allow routine inspections for compliance when you signed the HOA agreement." I stepped closer, calm, measured. But my voice could cut through steel. "I'm a federal judge. Karen, that agreement gives you the right to request an inspection, not break and enter." She scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." I used the spare key from the HOA lockbox. Nothing illegal. My eyes narrowed. That's exactly what makes it illegal. Karen's face faltered. She had no idea the law she tried to dance around had just sunk its teeth in her. And I hadn't even opened my mouth in court yet. Karen's smugness returned fast, as if my title meant nothing to her. "Well, Judge Thomas," she said, drawing out the word like an insult, "around here, I represent the HOO. We have standards, and yours, frankly, aren't being met." She pointed to a tiny patch of weeds by the back window. "Violation 3B, grounds not properly maintained. That's a $250 fine and a mandatory inspection." I stared at her unblinking. "Karen," I said slowly, "you broke into my private residence without a warrant, probable cause, or even my knowledge. That's trespassing. It's also unlawful entry. And depending on how long you've been poking around, we might be talking burglary." The folder in her hand trembled. "You wouldn't press charges over a weed." "I don't give a damn about the weed," I said. "I care about the law." Karen's bravado cracked for the first time. "I'm just doing my job, making sure the community stays, upscale." I tilted my head. "That why you've never broken into Brad's place? Even though his gutters look like a botanical experiment?" Silence. "Or Ms. Alvarez's house? Even though she leaves her bins out 2 days too long every week?" Her lips twitched. I saw it then. The truth behind the clipboard. This wasn't about weeds. Or rules. This was about me. The black homeowner who never attended HOA socials. The one she couldn't control. She straightened. "You may wear a robe in court, but here, we all follow the same rules." I gave her a thin smile. "Good, because the same rules say you'll be seeing me in court now." She blinked. "You're going to sue me?" "Oh no, Karen," I said, walking to the phone. "I'm going to press charges." Karen's confident smirk vanished when the squad car rolled up. "You really called the cops?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, the law silent but screaming from the veins in my temple. The officers stepped out young, alert. One recognized me immediately. "Judge Thomas." Officer Rivera nodded with a mix of respect and alarm. "Is everything all right?" I motioned to Karen, still holding her inspection folder like it was holy scripture. She entered my home without a warrant, without consent, and used an unauthorized copy of a private key stored by the HOA. "I'd like to file a report for unlawful entry, trespassing, and possibly theft." Karen's jaw dropped. "Theft? I didn't take anything." "Then where's my gavel?" I snapped. The officers exchanged a look. Rivera turned to her. "Ma'am, did you have permission to enter the home?" "It's all in the HOA clause," she insisted. "We're allowed to inspect." "That clause does not supersede state or federal law," I cut in sharply. "And it certainly doesn't authorize covert entry into a judge's private residence." Now neighbors began gathering, phones up, recording, watching the mighty Karen, the woman who cited people for leaving their trash bins out an extra hour being questioned by police on my lawn. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low. "This will turn into a war in the neighborhood." I stepped closer, voice firm. This isn't war, Karen. This is consequence. Something you're not used to because no one's ever stood up to you. Her face paled, and for the first time, she realized she wasn't standing on a pedestal anymore. She was standing on thin ice. Corinne sat smugly in the courtroom, arms crossed, lips curled in her signature smirk. She wore pearls, of course, and a floral blazer like she was attending brunch, not standing trial for felony trespassing and abuse of power. Her lawyer stood beside her, flipping through notes like he was preparing for traffic court. He had no idea who he was up against. I didn't sit on the bench that day. I was on the other side, as the plaintiff. I had assigned another federal judge to oversee the case. Impartial, ruthless, brilliant, exactly what Karen wasn't ready for. She leaned over to her attorney and whispered, loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "This is a waste of time. He's just upset because someone dared to inspect his precious bookshelves." The judge looked up. "Miss Aldridge, care to repeat that for the record?" Karen blinked. I was just saying I didn't mean any harm." Then I stood calm, unshaken, and holding a flash drive. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to enter Exhibit B. Home security footage, time-stamped, audio-enabled." The courtroom hushed. The bailiff inserted the drive. The screen lit up. There she was, entering without consent, snooping through my personal mail. Opening drawers, pocketing a USB stick. Gasps. Audible ones. Karen's face turned the color of spoiled milk. Then came the kicker, my voice on the footage, asking her point blank, "Did you just steal from me?" Her reply, "It's just HOA evidence. You'll thank me later when I clean up your little secrets." The courtroom went silent. And in that silence, you could hear it, the sound of her confidence cracking. The courtroom was full. Karen sat across the aisle, face tight, lips pressed like she was physically trying to stop herself from interrupting the judge. But this time, she wasn't in control. This wasn't an HOA meeting where she could swing her clipboard around like Thor's hammer. This wasn't her playground. This was mine, Judge Matthews, a longtime colleague and someone who had never once tolerated nonsense in his courtroom, adjusted his glasses and peered at her over the rim. "So let me get this straight," he said slowly, voice sharp and clinical. "You entered Mr. Thomas' home without a warrant, without permission, and under the claim of an HOA regulation that doesn't exist." Karen stood up quickly, too quickly. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, "I was acting in the interest of the community. There have been multiple complaints about Judge Thomas' property, excessive foliage, mysterious packages, a wind chime that disrupts peace. After 9 p.m., sit down," Judge Matthews ordered, his voice a thunderclap that echoed across the walls. Karen sat. He turned to me. "Your complaint includes unlawful entry, theft of personal items, invasion of privacy, and defamation?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing. "And a formal request for an injunction against the HOA's abuse of authority. This is not a one-time incident. Karen has harassed, threatened, and manipulated her position as HOA president for personal vendettas. I have documented cases from multiple neighbors. She oversteps, and when challenged, she retaliates." Karen leaned forward. "I do not retaliate. I maintain order. And this man," she pointed at me like a spoiled child, "he thinks his job makes him untouchable." Silence. Judge Matthews raised a brow. "Did you just say that a federal judge considers himself untouchable? For calling the police after you broke into his home?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. I took a deep breath. "Your Honor, the truth is, she saw me as a target. Not because I broke any laws, but because I didn't bow to her self-imposed authority. And now that she's finally facing legal consequences, she wants to spin the narrative into victimhood." Karen scoffed. "You're twisting everything. I was investigating him. You should be asking what he was hiding." "I'll stop you right there," Matthews said. "Do you have any evidence of wrongdoing on Mr. Thomas' part?" Karen hesitated. "Well," she started, He had books on law that looked questionable, and surveillance equipment." I raised my hand calmly. "Security cameras. Perfectly legal. Installed after the first time she tried to inspect my backyard without notice." Karen's face was red now. The weight of the room, the gravity of the law, was pressing in on her like a slowly tightening vice. But I wasn't done. I have one more exhibit, Your Honor. The bailiff brought forward a flash drive. It contained clips from my security system, the very ones Karen claimed were suspicious. What they actually showed was her rifling through drawers, reading private mail, and even taking selfies with my gavel. The courtroom watched in quiet horror as the footage played. Karen was oblivious to the camera in the corner as she walked through my living room like it was her own, judging my taste in furniture out loud and laughing at the framed photo of me with the Attorney General. When the footage ended, Judge Matthews removed his glasses slowly, looking as though he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. "I'm struggling to comprehend," he said. "You broke into a federal judge's home, rummaged through his belongings, and then filed a counter-complaint because he caught you?" Karen's voice was a whisper now. I didn't think he'd press charges. I just wanted to make sure he WSN single quotes to ... dangerous." "You didn't think he'd press charges," Matthews repeated, "because you thought you were above accountability." And there it was, the truth she never wanted to admit. Karen, like many bullies with a little power, never thought the law applied to her. She had worn her HOA title like a crown, turning community leadership into a tool of personal vengeance. Now the robe of justice stared her in the face, and it was not amused. "Here's what's going to happen," Judge Matthews said. "Effective immediately, a temporary restraining order will be granted preventing Ms. Karen Monroe from having any contact with Judge Thomas. A criminal investigation into her unlawful entry is to proceed, and this court strongly recommends the HOA board review her role as president, as her behavior constitutes an abuse of her position." Karen opened her mouth, but Matthews raised his hand again. "No more. You've said enough." As the hearing ended, people started murmuring. Some were neighbors who had quietly followed the case. Others were HOA board members who had grown tired of Karen's reign but were too afraid to stand against her. But now, she was exposed. As I gathered my things, one of those neighbors, an elderly woman named Mrs. Alvarez, touched my arm and whispered, "Thank you. We've lived under her shadow for years." I nodded. "Not anymore." Outside the courthouse, Karen stormed past reporters, shielding her face with a manila folder. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had already done what she never expected stood up to her, using the very law she believed she could outrun. She thought breaking into my home would rattle me, but she didn't know I write the verdicts. And this one was just the beginning. Karen sat in the courtroom, eyes darting like a cornered animal. The woman who once strutted through the neighborhood like she owned it now sat silent, pale, and visibly trembling. Her lawyer, clearly underpaid and overwhelmed, was flipping through documents he barely understood. I adjusted my robe and took my seat behind the bench. Though I wasn't presiding over the case, the judge on duty gave me a front row seat as a federal officer and victim. The court was packed. Neighbors, reporters, HOA board members who had suddenly resigned. They all wanted to see how this ended. The prosecution began. "Your Honor, the defendant, Karen Louise Templeton, unlawfully entered the private residence of a federal judge, tampered with property, and falsely claimed HOA's authority to justify her actions." Her attorney stood. "She was just doing her job as HOA president. Is her job breaking and entering?" The judge asked coldly. The room fell silent. Her lawyer fumbled. "She believed she had implied consent." That's when I stood. "With all due respect to the court, I'd like to clarify what implied consent actually means, because I wrote the federal brief that defines it." Heads turned. I continued, voice steady. "No clause, OA or otherwise, grants access to a private residence without explicit consent, a warrant, or emergency cause. Karen had none of those. What she had was entitlement, arrogance, and a blatant disregard for the law." Karen shrank in her seat. The judge nodded. "That will be noted on the record." Karen's smirk from weeks ago was gone. Now she was just a woman staring down the barrel of consequences she never believed she'd face. And justice was just getting warmed up. The courtroom was silent, every breath held, every eye fixed on me. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling just slightly, her smug composure worn down after days of testimony. cross-examinations, and undeniable evidence. She still wore pearls, still dressed in cream. But now she looked more like a deer on ice than a lioness in charge. I sat in my rightful place on the bench, the federal bench. Black robes, cold eyes, neutral voice. This court finds the defendant. I paused, letting the words echo. Guilty of unlawful entry, abuse of authority, and violation of federal privacy statutes under the Homeowner Protection Act. A gasp, then silence again. Karen closed her eyes slowly, her lips twitching like she might protest. But even she knew better now. I continued. Furthermore, due to the defendant's position as HOA president, her abuse of power has affected multiple homeowners in this neighborhood. Testimonies provided by other residents show a consistent pattern of harassment, discrimination, and overreach. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a brick. I turned to the court clerk. In addition to the personal fines and criminal record, the court is ordering a mandatory federal audit of the HOA, all its finances, all its leadership. And a temporary federal oversight committee will be installed, effective immediately. Boom.her. Empire, shattered.her power, gone. I removed my glasses. And lastly, I said calmly, this court issues a permanent restraining order. Karen McIntyre is hereby prohibited from holding any leadership position in any HOA or residential association for life. Done. Karen stood weakly. You can't do this. This was just about a spice rack. I stood too. And I said one final thing. You broke into a federal judge's house. You violated the Constitution inside the very home of someone sworn to defend it. Then I walked out. Epilogue: a month later, my lawn was wild with flowers. My wind chimes sang freely in the breeze. The neighbors smiled more now. Some even came to thank me. Karen. She moved out in shame. Her name became neighborhood legend. A cautionary tale, but for me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. The kind that doesn't knock before entering, but kicks the damn door down when the law is broken.